What's up, guys? I'm EJ, joined here by Kendall. We'll be doing another NBA draft preview video. This time, Kendall, we'll be answering some burning questions about the 2022 prospects we expect to enter this year's NBA draft. And there are quite a lot of questions we got to get to. So I'm ready to get started. Let's start with the first one. And here I'm going to ask you, Kendall, which freshman do you feel like right now is under the radar when we think about some of these 2022 NBA prospects?
I think the guy to me that I think's falling a little bit under the radar, that's being a little underrated, is Harrison Ingram. Harrison Ingram, a freshman out of Texas who's going to Stanford. Interesting prospect to me. Forward, plays with a lot of physicality, a lot of strength. Reminds me of actually another Harrison, and that's Harrison Barnes. Wing, obviously with the Sacramento Kings. He's had a long NBA career. He plays a lot like Harrison Barnes. Not a great handle right now, but there's room for improvement there. Obviously, he's a young player, but again, I like the athleticism, like the physical profile, and I mean, look, where he's going to a team in Stanford that's going to need him to be, a go-to guy. I think we saw last year Zaire Williams, in what was a kind of a chaotic season, obviously for Stanford, particularly. He kind of struggled in that regard, but then we saw the year prior to that, the guy Tyrell Terry play really well as a freshman, end up being an under the radar guy, and I think we're gonna see Harrison Ingram be a guy who ends up being a one and done that people aren't expecting right now.
That's a good pick. Ingram again, a really solid wing player, and definitely I think under the radar. I haven't seen him as a consensus first round pick or anything like that, so. I like to pick with Ingram. I'm going with Max Christie out of Michigan State. I really fell in love with this guy's game watching film about him over the summer. Really skilled, really poised, just a smooth kind of offensive game. Really good handle for a two guard. And I think to me, if you think about what may be missing and why he may be a little under the radar. Perhaps maybe not the strength and even that dog that maybe you would want out of a player who you're talking about as a two guard. You want to get in the lottery. But guess where he's going? He's going to Michigan State. So if you want to talk about getting some dog and getting that physical strength and that emotional strength, that's the place to go. I love that he chose that school. I think you're going to see him improve over the course of the season because the skills are there. I think Max Christie is a very, very interesting player to watch. And they got to follow this season, who's I think right now definitely under the radar. Let's go to the second question, Kendall. So here I'm gonna ask you, which upperclassman prospect right now do you feel like is a player to watch at this point?
I think an upperclassman to watch this season is Javon Quinterly, point guard.
Shout out to Jelly Fam.
Jelly fans, they're still playing college basketball.
Yeah.
Javon Quinterly, again, been on the scene, as a high profile guy for feels like forever, but I'll say probably a good 4 years.
Yeah.
And obviously he had the situation in Arizona, ended up at Alabama, and now, ended up at Villanova, then ended up at Alabama.
Right, yeah.
Via transfer. Can't forget that. You can't forget that part of it. But Quinterly, I think really surprised a lot of people last year because at Villanova he struggled a lot. And, for a guy that was really heralded coming out, really skilled player, he struggled a little bit at Villanova and then got to Alabama and really sort of rekindled the skill set that people, saw him have in high school. Obviously the handle is, top 1% in college basketball.
Electrifying, yeah.
Yeah, electrifying handle. Really good passer. His scoring ability, the jelly layups, it's his signature, one of the signature things. So it's really good finishing around the rim. But the overall scoring package is, I think, something that I think has started to catch up with him. And I think we saw him really come on late, in the SEC tournament, in the NCAA tournament, really have moments where, that became his team really down the stretch. For a team that had guys like Josh Primo, obviously, that ended up being an NBA guy, and Herb Jones is also obviously in the NBA as well.
Yeah, Shackelford as well. Yeah.
Yes, Jaden Shackelford. So it'll be interesting because this is going to be a good team now.
Again,
Shackelford's back, and obviously J.D. Davidson is a guy in the backcourt that they're really excited about. But I don't think J.D. Davidson's going to be the best point guard on this team. And I think Quinterly might wind up being the best point guard in the country. And
Wow.
if you end up having that distinction, it's going to be hard. I don't think he'll be in the lottery, but I think he's going to be a end of the first round point guard that we look at and we say, who's the Malachi Flynn, who's the Peyton Pritchard type of point guard in this year's draft. I think it's going to be Javon Quinterly.
When Quinterly gets in the open court, he is one of the most exciting players in college basketball. Definitely a guy to watch this season as an upperclassman. So when it comes to me for upperclassmen, I'm going with Matthew Mayer, senior out of Baylor. Kendall, what right now is in vogue? You're talking about combo fours, guys who can play multiple positions, play 3, 4, maybe even 5. Matthew Mayer fits that bill. Excellent passer, excellent ball handler. You want to talk about offensive versatility. I mean, they use him a lot in pick and roll at Baylor, and he's one of the best pick and roll guys, not just on his team but in the country as a ball handler. Not just with his shooting, but with his passing. We already know about his shooting and his spot up ability. He's a very, very good offensive player. Not too many weaknesses. Good athlete as well. Long. Reminds me a lot of Chandler Parsons, former Houston Rocket, former Dallas Maverick. Mayer, as to be honest, I think the reason why he kind of fell a little bit under the radar throughout his career is that Baylor had a stacked team with some excellent guards. And why would you take the ball out of Mitchell or Butler's hands when you got guys that good? But when Mayer got his opportunities, he was deadly as a sixth man. I think you're going to see him catapult himself into like an All-American type of player. He's going to be definitely upperclassman to watch when it comes to the NBA draft. Let's go to mid-major prospects. So I'll go first on this one. And I'm going to go with Antoine Davis. Detroit Mercy. This guy's been lighting it up pretty much every year of his career. Now, look, his dad, Mike Davis, former Indiana coach, has given him a green light, brighter than Jon Stewart, brighter than Hal Jordan, brighter than Kyle Rayner, any Green Lantern you can think of. I mean, this kid has the ultimate green light. With that being said, I mean, he's a very impressive offensive scorer. So, with, now flipping superhero analogy, with great power comes great responsibility, he has great power. I mean, this guy is really tough to stop. Excellent pull-up game, deep range, can play 1 and 2, though he's small, so that's the big thing to watch. And that's why, I don't know if you're talking about a guy who was a first-round pick, but the last 2 years he flirted about thinking about whether or not he should go into the NBA, decided to stay in school. I think that will be a benefit to him. He's playing in a Horizon League that has some dogs, has some good players. So it's a pretty good league, and if Detroit Mercy finds a way to surprise people and get into the tournament, the guy that we talked about last year, Max Asmus, who a lot of people think about with mid-major players to watch this year, maybe he becomes this year's Max Asmus. Watch out for Antoine Davis.
And even another name, I beyond Max Asmus, I think about Bones Highland. When we talk about really small, kind of skinny guard, but just with a lot of game and can really score the basketball. I mean, that's going to be Antoine Davis. Now, the problem is Bones Highland was on a really good team, at VCU that was tournament caliber. He's every time I've watched Antoine Davis, his team is losing by 30 points,
Right. But they did finish above 500 last year. First time under Mike Davis.
Typically, I'm watching him playing against good teams. So I'm like, this guy's pretty good, but team's losing by 30.
Last year, the first year, they finished above 500. So, maybe things starting to go on the upswing for Mike Davis's crew there.
But, he's a guy, he's averaged 20 every year of his career.
I think he's averaged 24, 25 every year of his career. I mean, he's you want to talk about guys trying to break that potential, scoring number for their career. He has an outside shot because of how much he's scoring.
So the mid-major prospect for me to watch this season is I'm going to the Atlantic 10. I'm looking at HYUNJUNG Lee out of Davidson, wing shooter out of Davidson, who honestly may be the best shooter in the country. He's been a 50, 40, 90 guy, both on the FIBA level playing for South Korea, but also on the NCAA level playing for Davidson. Can shoot off the catch, can shoot off movement. Not much of an isolation guy, but it's good size. I mean, 6'7". You think about your Duncan Robinson types. Those guys who have size and can shoot it. Your Klay Thompsons. HYUNJUNG Lee is, again, we're talking about just elite shooter in a draft that right now projects to not be great in terms of shooting. Nobody that really jumps off the page right now. And typically shooting is not really a skill that gets evaluated, this early. But
Right.
with Hyunjung Lee, it's real. It's there is no question about it. So, when you're talking about, archetypes and you're talking about who's the best shooter in the draft, those guys tend to get drafted higher than maybe we think, going in, or we even think of them as prospects overall. So with Lee's shooting ability, he's gonna be a guy that I'd be surprised if he's not. He'll certainly be playing in the summer league next year,
Right.
if he enters the draft. But he could wind up being a guy that maybe even goes in the first round
Wow.
if he's able to develop, into a 17, 18 point scorer. I mean, he averaged 13 last year at Davidson. If the responsibilities continuing to increase, and he's an all A10 kind of player, or even an all A10 player of the year, or A10 player of the year, then we're talking about a guy that with his shooting ability is going
Yeah.
to be
Exactly.
really, really coveted by NBA teams.
Yeah, and I think Lee also, I think he is underrated with the other aspects of this game too. Of course, when you shoot the ball that great, it opens up other things. But I think,
Yeah,
I think he has some nifty finishes. He's got really good size.
yeah.
He's an intriguing prospect. If he was playing at name the big school, I think that you would be looking at him saying, "Hey, this guy's an interesting player to follow."
He's a guy that, you know, as a fan of a team that is bigger than Davidson, you would have hoped that he would have entered the portal.
Right, definitely, yeah,
Particularly in this year where guys it was free agency. I'm sure there was a lot of Power Five schools that were kicking themselves that he did not enter the portal because, uh, similar to Trey Murphy leaving Rice and going to Virginia and becoming a first round pick, that could have wound up being the path for Lee. Lee decided to be loyal to Bob McKillop and Davidson,
yeah.
and we'll see how that works out for him.
I also love Bob McKillop's system. They run really good stuff, and seeing him
That's
move
why
on
he
the
went to
ball this
Davidson, by
year,
the way,
right? Yeah,
uh,
and it makes sense. You know,
because of the Steph Curry part of it.
yeah.
Being a kid from South Korea, obviously Davidson is not a household name of a college, but
He knew
but
Steph Curry was like many
yeah,
people around the
exactly.
world.
Oh, Steph
He knew who
Curry gets
Steph
back.
Curry was, and he's like, I want to go where that guy goes. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, Biggest riser in this draft, Kendall. So for me, this is interesting. So when we think of biggest riser, we're thinking about guys who maybe we're looking at kind of a snapshot of where mock drafts are now, and we're saying, okay, when we get to June, where will these guys be? So I'm gonna say Jaden Ivey. I'm gonna say the guard out of Purdue. I thought he had a really good summer. I really liked the leadership he displayed, the defense, the two-way ability he showed with Team USA, playing overseas, winning a gold medal for Team USA, and a really great game against Team France. And I think he's again another kind of underrated guy. He's a really good athlete. He's got good one-on-one ability. He's really good in transition, and he's fearless. Purdue had a really disappointing tournament run last year. Well, it wasn't a run; they lost in the first round. But I thought that he was still the most impressive guy on the floor, and I think that there were playing times last season when you watched them play. He looked like a guy that was probably a year away from figuring it all out. I think this summer to me showed that he maybe now is a half step away or half a year away. I think he's right on the cusp, and I think that that leadership he showed playing for a very talented Team USA team, he stood out in every game they played. I expect Ivy to have a big year, and you just can't have a top 10 of NBA draft picks and there's just no upper class, no guy that's not a freshman or international guy. There's going to be somebody that's played college basketball that has a body of work that will take their experience from their freshman year or sophomore year or some other year to into this season, and then we'll have a big year. I'm banking on that being Jaden Ivey in a very difficult Big Ten league. He stands out as an All-American. He rises in this year's NBA draft.
Uh, for me, the biggest riser, I think, Jaden Ivy is a keep getting mixed up with Jaden Hardy. It's gonna plague
That's
me all
gonna be a
draft.
problem with draft people all season.
Yeah, all year. Jaden Ivey is gonna be certainly a guy who continues to rise. He's certainly like a popular pick in that regard. I think he's actually gonna be a really interesting guy to track because sometimes you get those guys who have that returning buzz and then they have
The
the target.
Marcus Smart effect, yeah.
Yeah, the Marcus Smart effect to some degree.
It has
For
Barnes
me,
effect too,
I have maybe a similar kind of guy But a guy who's fallen a little bit more under the radar and his stock's dropped a little bit is Marcus Bagley, sophomore out of Arizona State, who came in last year semi unheralded. Obviously, his brother plays in the NBA, so people knew who he was, but wasn't looked at as an NBA prospect, playing next to Josh Christopher at Arizona State, Remy Martin. And then early on, for a team that was struggling, people started to look at him and say, hey, he might be the best NBA prospect on this team.
Yeah.
Forget Josh Christopher. Then, injuries and whatnot, and just what was, again, a COVID-plagued season where guys, games were canceled and guys, were missing games for whatever reason. His stock continued to drop a little bit, and he probably could have entered the draft, but it would have been based off of what he did the first month of the season, not really much of what he did during Pac-12 play. He decided to come back, enter the portal, but decided to come back anyway. And now he's back at Arizona State, and this should really be his team. They lost Remy Martin, they lost Josh Christopher. Everything now will be going through Marcus Bagley. Which I'm sure is going to make Marvin Bagley Sr. Or Marvin Bagley Jr. I should say happy. But everything's going to go through Marcus Bagley now, and that'll be interesting. I think he displays a good offensive game for a guy his size. He displays some interesting athleticism as well, and I think what teams are really going to like is just how he fits in the NBA. I don't think he's a guy. He doesn't project to be your number one option, but he projects to be similar to like a DeAndre Hunter in being just a really good defensive player who can hit open shots and can guard multiple positions. And I think that's a guy. He may not go number 1, may not go number 10, but I would not be surprised if he's a late lottery. Maybe somewhere in the teens type of draft pick, and that's not really where you're seeing him mocked right now. In part because he struggled, down the stretch. But
yeah, it's funny you mentioned Bagley Sr. I'll tell you what, if Bobby Hurley was paying attention to this NBA season, he would know you don't want smoke with the Bagley Pops. let's just say that. For prospect with the most to prove for this season, Kendall, I'll let you go first on this one. This is the last question we got for today. Who is the prospect you feel like with the most to prove?
It's interesting. I have 2 names. I'll mention one later after you give yours, but I'll go with the guy that I've written down here for the sake, because a name popped up while you were talking about someone else. But the prospect to me with the most to prove is Max Abmas, guy we talked about earlier in the video. Yeah. As a guy who came back to this draft cycle, he entered last year after being a dynamite, obviously, really all season, but particularly in the NCAA tournament. Entered the draft, went to the combine. Probably shouldn't have went to the combine, but went to the combine. And played his game, but he realized that he probably had a lot to work on, and decided to come back. And now he's going by Midcourt Max, thanks to NIL and Midcourt Max. We'll see.
Go get that bag, Max. Go get that bag.
Absolutely. But the guy averaged 24 points. I don't know how much more he has to prove from a statistical standpoint. It's just going to be those big games. It's going to be the games. They play Oklahoma State again. They played them last year. He gave them the business last year. Yeah. This time they're playing, I believe, in Tulsa. At Oral Roberts. So that'll be an interesting game.
Should be a great atmosphere.
Yeah, it should be a great atmosphere for them. I believe they also do play Tulsa as well. So they have some games against marquee opponents, like at TCU. So those are going to be the games that, you have to circle if you're a scout to see how does Max Abmas play in these environments, on these national stages. But really, it also is going to come down to tournament time. I suspect that Paul Mills' team will be in the tournament again. I'm not a Summit League expert, but I don't know if anybody else in the Summit League has Max Abmas. Kevin O'Banner is not there, unfortunately. But
that's gonna hurt. That boy can play.
Yeah.
We saw in the tournament. O'Banner is he's a baller.
Yeah, but hopefully Max Abmas can carry the load, and if they make it to the tournament, he'll be a household name by the time we get to March. So it should be interesting.
Yeah, Abmas definitely was a March darling last season.
Real quick, the only thing I'll say that if talking about something he needs to improve in terms of to show scouts what does he have to improve upon. I think it's going to be not only those big games, but also how does he get his teammates involved? How does he play? Because you can't be, a 6-foot point guard and not be able to. That's not really much of a defender, and not be able to do anything but score. Not in today's NBA. Unless you're gonna go out there and be Isaiah Thomas, which nobody thinks that's what he's gonna do. He's got to show some semblance of playmaking, really, like Trae Young, because that's the comp that he had coming out for a lot of people. Oh, this guy is like maybe the next Trae Young, but Trae Young's a 10 assists a game guy. Like Sharif Cooper is that kind of passer, and that's what Trae Young is. Like, that can't be overlooked. Max Asmus haven't proven that. Maybe he's worked on that in the offseason. That's what he's gonna have to show.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point about Asmus' ability to get other guys involved. So yeah, I think that's gonna
hard to do it over Roberts, to be fair, but
yeah, and part of it too is they need him to score. So even though they're throwing 2 or 3 guys at him, how does he handle that? It's going to be, I think, a storyline to watch for this season. My guy, I think, is kind of a similar track, but obviously a much higher profile in terms of the school and the name. I'm going with Johnny Juzang, who's coming back to UCLA this year after the guy was just straight getting buckets in the NCAA tournament throughout last season. I think he raised a lot of eyebrows in the tournament with his play. But then, similar to Asmus, we got to the combine, and he struggled. I mean, you know me, I was telling you I was watching the tape, and I thought that Juzang was a clear first-round pick from what I had seen in the tournament, and that the combine was just going to be kind of formality. And then I told you, I was like, he can't enter the draft after this performance. I mean, he has to go back. I mean, this is not good. And you don't want to go crazy over the combine, but it just seemed like some of the little things that if you weren't sold on him could concern you seemed to maybe get a little exposed when he got to the combine, was playing against guys who were just as big, just as athletic. UCLA plays a lot of small lineups. He's not playing the 4, against in the combine. He's playing against other guys who are 6'7", 6'8", really athletic. And he was having trouble getting some of that one-on-one stuff off. And his whole game is predicated on being a premier one-on-one scorer, a tough shot maker. So I think he has a lot to prove this season. I mean, we know he can score on the college level, but I think for a lot of people who watched him play in the Pac-12, it was almost like that kind of like we seen in the NBA with some of that kind of bubble kind of mentality, where a lot of people who played against him was like, that guy wasn't the same guy. I mean, we played UCLA during the season. He was a good player.
Right.
He wasn't the guy that was just straight cooking Gonzaga and cooking some of these really excellent teams throughout the NCAA tournament, or Michigan and Michigan State. So
like the kids that are McDonald's All Americans, they call themselves a burger boy. He's a bubble boy.
I mean, I'm just saying. And I think that for a lot of people who follow the Pac-12, that was definitely something that they kind of saw, and then again for NBA scouts was questioning coming into that draft. So I think for Johnny Juzang, we expect UCLA to be a great team.
I was going to ask,
how do you have a big run?
How do you think that the UCLA dynamic now? You've got Hawkins coming back as well. You're bringing in Peyton Watson, who's going to be a guy that's going to try and get his shots and whatnot. You have Tyler Campbell, obviously, as the floor general. It's his game. He may not have the volume or the usage that maybe he had in the tournament, where they were leaning on him to be their bucket getter. Yeah. With some of these other guys also being high profile. And
that's gonna end up becoming more questions.
I mean, I totally agree. Those are some questions.
Yeah, because when it came to the tournament, I think when UCLA, I think you said the whole regular season was trying to figure out who they were offensively, and I think by the tournament time they just realized we just gotta just let Hawkins and Juzang just go one-on-one on their guy, and just live with that basically. We gotta have low turnovers, and we gotta play good defense. And it worked. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I think it worked. I think we saw Tyler Campbell not really look for a shot as much during the tournament as well. I think he's one of the best floor generals in college basketball, and he was exceptional during the tournament. But I think he did it by kind of deferring to those other scorers. So that's going to be a great question, is with more guys in the fold, how does that affect Juzang? I think the name, I think he won't be as affected as much, to be honest, because I think that he comes in now as the most high-profile player that's returning in college basketball. So I think he'll be fine.
Him and Drew Timme, yeah.
And Timme, yeah, both of those guys. I think he'll get his shots. But perhaps it won't be the so-called green light that maybe we saw in the tournament. I think for me, in terms of what I need to see from him in terms of things to prove, I got to see a full regular season body of work, to be honest. It was, I mean, look, he showed a lot of heart. He showed a lot of clutch gene in the NCAA tournament. That's not, you don't just throw that away because he had a rough combine. But I think for me, it's talking about, okay, well, we haven't seen a first-round pick body of work for a full season. We saw that only really in the NCAA tournament. Nobody thought Drew Zhang was a first-round guy in the regular season. So my thing is, okay, you got to have a regular season body of work showing that you're that kind of guy. And then hopefully another good tournament run. And then, a much improved time at the combine. Or if he plays good enough, he doesn't have to. Of course, that would probably be even most beneficial. But but kind of diversifying that game, showing that bigger, taller, more athletic guys won't give him as many problems as they did when he was, playing in the combine. I think it's going to be important. So he's the guy, one of the most high-profile players in college basketball with the most proof to me.
Was there a guy on any of these categories? Like I said, I had an honorable mention. But was there a guy for you that was maybe like right on the cusp that you thought about for any of these categories that you want to mention real quick?
I think for a mid-major player to watch, I mean, Max Asmus was a big person to consider, considering that he's, of course, from a mid-major. I didn't want to go so obvious with that pick. I'll tell you what, I think for me, the biggest riser, I was hesitant because I feel like people are really, really jumping on the bandwagon right now. But I thought Ty Washington was a guy that I really thought about because, as I mentioned in the top 5 video, which you guys have watched, that there's going to be a point guard drafted in the top 5 that's considered a top 5 prospect. We just don't know who that person is yet. So to me, it was like, okay, what player is going to be that guy? And I think you're starting to see some draft experts start to hedge their bets on Ty Washington. And I think it's a pretty good bet. I think of the top guys, if I had to pick a guy, he would be the guy. But in the sense of being fair in terms of biggest riser, I didn't want to go to Ty. But if you asked me 2 weeks ago, he would have been neck and neck with Ivey for me. Because he's an exceptional shooter. And when you can space the floor the way he can and get your shot off the way he can, he reminds me a lot of Chauncey Billups. I told you that this summer. I mean,
I see a lot of in this game. But
and that's a pretty good one too. But not gonna wow you with any real crazy athleticism, but just really steady, really really solid, and not too many really weaknesses. He's a really good player. So I think for that would probably be the guy that, if there was a guy I would say I was thinking about in this group, those were 2 guys for me. What about you?
Under the radar freshman, I thought about Tyrese Hunter, kid we saw during the Iverson Classic, who's at Iowa State. There's not going to be much there at Iowa State. They lost a lot. Lost Rasir Bolton, lost Tyler Harris, both to Gonzaga and Memphis, ironically. But so there's going to be a lot of room in the backcourt for him to work. But the guy that I mentioned that I thought about during the video was, you talked about Jaden Hardy and what he did during the FIBA, the FIBA games.
Jaden Ivey.
Yeah, I call it Jaden Hardy. Jaden Hardy again. There you go.
Yes, you did.
Jaden Ivey, what he did during the FIBA games playing for Team USA. Another guy that played on that team that could have fit in the mid-major prospect list or could have fit in the most approved is our boy
Kenneth Lawson. One of my favorite players in college basketball, man.
Kenneth Lawson Jr. Is a guy we're going to have to pay attention to this season because as well as he played, he played well obviously last year, and you know, and the NIT really opened a lot of people's eyes. And then when he made that USA team, people were also kind of surprised, like, really, Kenneth Lawson. Yeah. And he wound up being arguably the team's best player. You know, I mean, Chet wound up winning MVP off of name and whatnot, but Lofton was the guy.
He carried them in that championship game.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, playing in Conference USA this season, I mean, he's gonna be
the only reason why Lofton wasn't under consideration for mid-major prospect was I don't think he's gonna enter. I feel like he's probably a 3 or 4 year guy, regardless of what happens this season, because of just he's 6'7", 270. So just there are not a lot of archetypes for him in the NBA, especially with the games played. So I think he'll probably play at least one more season. But I do expect that people will learn his name this year because he was sensational this summer, and he had a really good freshman year at Louisiana Tech.
They've got a game where they play LSU. I think we'll have a lot to say about Kenneth Lawson Jr. By the time this, and because like you said, I mean, he's gonna put up numbers. So when you talk about entering the draft, if we're talking about a guy that averaged 21 and 8, I don't know, that'll be a conversation.
Right.
It's just the archetype, like you said, he just can't be a first round pick. Is he Drew Timme? Where Drew Timme, super hyper productive college player, but has to do at least 3 years, maybe 4, because of the position and the way he plays.
Garza, obviously different body type, but similar situation. And then one last guy for upperclassmen to watch. I also thought about Julian Champagnie, St. John's forward, because he had I thought he had a really good combine. I as someone who follows St. John's, I'm a St. John's fan as well, along with Gonzaga. I did not expect him to play that well at the combine. It's not a disrespect to his game. I just thought he was clearly a year or 2 away, and he comported himself extremely well. His brother entered, and I think that he could have entered. I think if he wanted to, would he have got drafted? It would have been close. But if his goal was only to get drafted, he might have had a shot if he entered the draft, considering his performance at that combine. So I think coming into this year, again, we're talking about combo forwards. He's a really streaky scorer, but when he gets going, he's incredibly hard to stop. So he's definitely going to be a player to watch. St. John's, a team to watch overall for college basketball this season. It's maybe a surprise team this year, so watch out for the Red Storm. But that will do it for this video previewing the NBA draft. Of course, there's a long season ahead of us, so we'll be talking plenty of NBA draft content on this podcast, or rather on this YouTube channel, and of course on our podcast. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Generation Media. Of course, as well, make sure you leave a comment in the comment section of what you think about some of these players. Who's your under-the-radar freshman? Who's your player with the most to prove in this draft class? Give us a comment in the comment section. Of course, if you like the video, give us a like as well. That'll do it for now. Thank you guys for checking this out. For Kendall, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace.